Shirley from UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei, and I will be facilitating for this session today. First and foremost, thank you all for joining us in today's 4th day of SME SDG Festival. This workshop titled Human Rights Due Diligence, Why Business as Usual Needs to Change is conducted by our knowledge partner, BCSD Malaysia. To start, I would first like to thank our knowledge partner, BCSD Malaysia, for hosting this session with us. And now I would like to invite Charlene to give an introduction before the whole session. Over to you, Charlene.
Thank you very much for that brief introduction as well, Kylie. And also a huge thank you to everyone today for attending our workshop on human rights due diligence, why business as usual needs to change. My name is Charlene Tan. I'm a project coordinator working with BCSD Malaysia, and we are delighted to bring you this workshop in collaboration with UN Global Compact as part of the SME SDG Festival 2021. So before we begin, let me just briefly go through a little bit for some housekeeping items. And so first and foremost, this session is being recorded. We will all have access to the video recording after the session as well. Also wanted to remind everyone that this is going to be an interactive workshop, and we believe that it is beneficial for everyone to participate and be active in the discussions as well, because one-way learning may not be as conducive in that sense. But what we do encourage is, if you're not speaking, for a smooth facilitation of the workshop, please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. And if you need to reach out to us to submit any thoughts, comments, or questions during the workshop, please feel free to use the chat box and we'll get to you shortly. So the workshop for the day is going to be run by our expert and guest facilitator, Ms. Anisha Rajapakse, who I'll be introducing shortly. But we will also be having short reflection, interaction, or discussion activities throughout the next 90 minutes as well. During these sessions, we may be using a tool called Mentimeter for the interactive discussions. Again, I will be giving instructions when the time comes, and also instructions will be posted in the chat box as well. And finally, again, if you have any questions or you get lost or any technical difficulties during the duration of the workshop, just let us know in the chat box. We will help you out straight away. Now, before we begin, let me just very quickly invite our Executive Director of BCSD Malaysia, Mr. Roberto Benatello, to give an opening remark to kickstart this workshop. And just to quickly introduce Roberto, he's again our Executive Director, and he has over 20 years of experience with a career that includes several senior general management positions with both Fortune 500 companies and startups in countries such as Italy, UK, and Spain before being based here in Malaysia. We are absolutely delighted to have him deliver some opening remarks on why human rights due diligence is important, who we are, and why we're doing this. So let's give a warm welcome to Roberto. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlene. I trust everybody can hear me okay. Yes, all right. So thank you, Charlene, for the kind and generous introduction, and thank you to the organizers for this great opportunity to be with you today. I can see that the attendees number is growing. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending our workshop on human rights due diligence, why business as usual needs to change. Yeah, so that's going to be the important key message today. Before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce who we are. We are the Business Council for Sustainable Development Malaysia, also known as BCSD Malaysia Berhad. We are a non-profit organization set up in Malaysia under Malaysian law. And what do? We are a CEO-led, action-oriented collaboration and advocacy platform, all these things. It's a bit of a mouthful. But in practice, what we do, we convene members, companies, and stakeholders in a pre-competitive, safe, and collaborative space to develop tools, methodologies, and also to share best practices among the business community here in Malaysia, but also in Southeast Asia. Through our projects and initiatives, we help companies embed sustainability into their core business strategy and operations. That's really an important function that we have. We try to explain to companies how they can best embed, use sustainability in their strategy and operation, so that they can contribute to transforming and to transitioning into a more sustainable world. But at the same time, they also become stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more successful. So for us, it's very important to create this link between sustainability performance, but also the success of an organization. So BCSD Malaysia strives to raise awareness and advocate the case for sustainability as a business opportunity. We are really convinced that sustainability is a business opportunity, and as a way to build a competitive advantage. So we see that more and more companies that are sustainable and they decide to embark seriously in sustainability, they also become better. They acquire competitive advantage vis-a-vis their competitors. So we bring together a collective business voice to engage with the policymakers. That's a very important part of the job that we do, and regulation authorities and regulators, okay? So we initiate projects and programs in collaboration with stakeholders in Malaysia, but as I said, also in Southeast Asia. And we are part of a network. We are one of the 62 global network partners scattered around the world of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's also known as WBCSD. It's our mother, if you wish, it's our mother organization. So WBCSD is a global CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. So these 200 leading businesses are the companies, very, very large companies with a global footprint, and they are members of the WBCSD. We work around 6 focus areas, namely circular economy, cities and mobility, climate and energy, food and nature, people and human rights, and reporting, governance, and assurance. We call this area, this last area, redefining value. We work together with government and non-government organizations, and we advocate for action in the 6 focus areas that I just mentioned. So we provide our members with access to our resources and expert know-how on specific actions, and how we try to teach business how to transform sustainably. So we do events, we do workshops, we do capacity building programs like this one, focused on responsible business practice. So through our work here at BCSD Malaysia, we definitely see a need for more education and awareness in the areas of human rights, and also the link between human rights and the environmental degradation. That's really important. That link is there and needs to be discussed and analyzed. One of the initiatives that we have developed and we have been actively involved in is what we call the Business for Human Rights and the Environment Platform. We call it with the acronym BREM. That we set up last year in collaboration with our partner. We work very closely, in fact, with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. It's an institute, it's a no-profit institute based in Stockholm, in Sweden. And they are at the forefront of research and publications in the issue of human rights and humanitarian law. So we're very fortunate, we're very lucky to be working with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and also we're very privileged because they put at our disposal experts from all over the world to help us understanding more issues related to human rights. So through this BREM platform, through this BREM initiative, we have delivered a series of learning sessions on the topics of human rights and the environment to a lot of companies in Malaysia, to the Malaysian business community. And we have covered topics such as, for example, labor rights, regulatory compliance risks at national and international level. The BREM platform is laying the groundwork to highlight the business value of corporate responsibility, as well as understand the current challenges faced by Malaysian companies when it comes to best practices and scaling up business action. Our events, our learning events, the ones that I just mentioned to you, are normally well attended and normally generate a robust discussion from the participants and the panelists, which is good. Many of the national and international experts and stakeholders that we work with have found these discussions very stimulating. I personally think that it's a positive sign that shows that business want to understand more human rights issues. They want to lower the risks of non-compliance when it comes to human rights, and hopefully they want to push for a sustainable business agenda overall. So Malaysian companies are responding well, and today's workshop is also a testament to that. We can see that the topic of human rights is becoming a hot topic for discussion among policymakers, business leaders, and both the international and the local community. I'm sure, especially this particular audience, I'm sure we're all familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which collectively represent an urgent call to action, very urgent call to action to end poverty, reduce inequality, and guarantee the right to a healthy living and working environment, among other essential rights. But as highlighted in the 2030 agenda, these SDGs should be implemented in accordance with international human rights law, which means that there must be an agreement both globally and locally on what constitutes these obligations. This also means that at all levels, from policymakers to corporate leaders and even to SMEs, everyone needs to start paying attention to how human rights and are respected in the business context in order for us to achieve the SDGs together. So the if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, it has especially highlighted a lot of red flags in the conditions faced by employees and workers. The pandemic has certainly contributed to increase awareness that there needs to be a healthier, more sustainable working environment. Businesses, even SMEs, are a huge driving force that can make meaningful change towards sustainable development. Large corporations, those that have a global footprint, they have the ability to affect large communities, either via global supply chains or their operations, scattered all over the world. They affect local economies, and they can also impact the environment in a drastic way. So key players in various markets and in various industries are starting to pay a lot of attention to human rights matters. There is an increased interest due to backlash from international markets related to human rights violations. Backlash that has affected even some major Malaysian players, as some of you, I'm sure, know. Interest in human rights and environment matters is also rising as a result of stipulations on these specific matters that are now common features in free trade agreements. So I'm sure that you know that most of free trade agreements that now are enforced and available between countries around the world have pretty solid chapters now on human rights and environment. So it has become really paramount. It has become really important for companies to understand these matters because they have a more and more influence on how companies can trade and can do business with other companies around the world. So why should we care? Now, this may sound like a problem we read about and does not affect us directly. It happens elsewhere, but not here. Or it doesn't really have an impact on me or my business personally. Not in my backyard, as they say. The truth is that the right to a healthy environment is increasingly becoming part and parcel of corporate policies and strategies to ensure responsible and sustainable business practices. And SMEs should be no exception. It would seem that the 21st century, we've been making much progress on the human rights front, but still, more than 40 million people today continue to be victims of what's called modern slavery, with 2/3 of them, unfortunately, located in Asia. Even in the Malaysian business context, various parties find it challenging to agree on what is the meaning, what constitutes modern slavery, or what should be the definition of a healthy working environment. For example, in terms of wages, severity of harsh treatment, what counts as excessive working hours, and others. Malaysia's effort to contain the COVID-19 spread had an impact on several marginalized communities. For example, migrants who had lost their jobs because of the outbreak were left unable to feed their families, or they were left unable to go back home because of the COVID restrictions. So often referred as the informal workers, they represent some 2.7 million people, making up almost 1/5 of the total workforce in Malaysia. New business models introduced during the pandemic do not consider the situation, as many, or the majority, I would say, are unable to work from home or remotely because they don't have access to technologies and remote working. So managing this transition to a post-pandemic world is one of the examples of why developing a coherent plan or blueprint for incorporating human rights into your business is so important in this day and age. Being able to respond quickly and adapt is a sign of a resilient business that is designed to withstand sudden changes or prevent potential backlash due to human rights non-compliance. As such, it is crucial to increase our understanding of human rights and the process of human rights due diligence. That's what we are here for today, to help us understanding the strengths and weaknesses of our companies when it comes to tackling human rights grievances and remedies. Local efforts have definitely been on the rise to ensure that multiple stakeholders are aligned in this area. The Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, the SUAKAM, has been working for a decade now to push the business and human rights agenda in Malaysia. And with the National Action Plan set to be launched by 2023, there's no time like now to begin applying due diligence measures to businesses to ensure adherence to human rights commitments and regulations. As BCSD Malaysia is committed to working with businesses in the areas of sustainability, we also offer a variety of trainings, programs, and initiatives that may be of interest to companies looking to apply human rights due diligence. Today's workshop, for example, is a short, I would say, sneak preview of a more in-depth human rights due diligence training course that BCSD Malaysia has developed This training course will be delivered through workshops that will be tailored towards the specific circumstances, I would say, of the participating company. So we're able to tailor this workshop to the specific scenario that each company is experiencing, led by our expert facilitators on business and human rights. This workshop will provide participants with a great resources on applying human rights due diligence and sustainable methodologies for their own business. Aside from our planned series on human rights due diligence training, we offer useful resources, training, and capacity building in the area of corporate sustainability, which can also be customized for your business needs. So please visit our social media and our website, bcsd.my, for more information on how BCSD Malaysia can help you in your sustainability journey. We hope you will be able to bring some takeaway messages today from this session as well. Actually, I'm sure you will. Now I leave you in the capable hands of my colleagues, Charlene and Anisha, for the rest of the program today. Thank you very much and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Roberto, as well for that introduction to BCSD Malaysia, as well as reminding us why it's becoming increasingly important to incorporate human rights into business in this day and age. So without further ado, let me also very quickly give a warm welcome to our expert and workshop facilitator for today, Ms. Anisha Rajapakse, who she will be running the workshop mainly, and we are really delighted for her to contribute her expertise today. So Anisha is a senior global expert with 2 decades of progressive experience working at the intersection of human rights, business, and international development. She has experience working with corporates, governments, international bodies, promoting the business and human rights agenda towards ensuring safe jobs in dignified working conditions. Now she's relocated to Asia, but she's continuing to support companies to ethically recruit and manage workforces and mitigate the risk of illegal and unethical exploitation. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Anisha, who will take us through the main topic for our workshop for today. Over to you, Anisha.
Thank you, Charlene. Thanks for that lovely introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I can see that there's a lot of interest in this particular area. And as Robert has said, you know, it is really important now in a post-pandemic. Well, I wouldn't say post fully as well, because we're not out of the woods yet, but still it's imperative for businesses to really move forward. And today we've nearly come to the end of 2021. And as many of you have experienced, the pandemic, the social and racial unrest that really compelled many businesses to come forward and take a public stand starting last year, goes to show that there's more of an imperative for businesses to really walk the talk when it comes to business and human rights and sustainable business practices. So before I really get into this session, and also it's to know really that this is an introductory workshop. So it's really not possible in the given time to do a deep dive into the main issues at length, but definitely this will give you a strong start and give an informed overview of how you can really get started and how you can think about it and see what really suits your company and your journey towards ensuring responsible business practices. So I'm going to start by showing a brief clip, which will give you an idea as to like what we're going to be talking about for the next hour or so. So over to Charlene.
In the last 25 years, dozens of companies have ended up in court or on front pages because their suppliers treat workers poorly or pollute the environment. Around the world, governments are passing laws requiring companies to know what goes on in their supply chains and to report that knowledge publicly. You spend a lot of time assessing your suppliers on quality, price, and flexibility, but those aren't the only risks in your supply chain. One scandal in one supplier could be the difference between attracting new customers and investors or turning your existing ones against you. Leading companies are making explicit commitments to improving conditions in their supply chains. Some companies refer to this under the headline of human rights, while others use the term sustainability or corporate social responsibility. What it's called, though, is a lot less important than what it means: finding out how your company is impacting people and taking steps to address those impacts. The following video describes what human rights mean for your suppliers and how they can get started. Human rights may sound like something new for your company, but it's actually a component of a lot of things you're already doing. Human rights doesn't require you to fundamentally change the way you assess your suppliers, but it does ask you to consider your risks in a systematic way. Human rights is a term you hear a lot nowadays, but as a business, do you know what it means to you? Here's the basics. Human rights are a set of principles that define how people should be treated. They shouldn't be abused or kicked off their land. They should have access to food and healthcare, no matter their gender or background. Every country in the world has agreed to these principles, and every person in the world is entitled to them. Most human rights can be affected by companies. When workers breathe in toxic fumes, that violates their right to health. When a manager only hires employees of his own race or religion, that violates the right to equal treatment. When businesses buy land without consulting communities, that violates their right to property. These issues are complex, and companies can't be responsible for every problem in every country. But increasingly, businesses are finding out how workers, customers, and communities are impacted by their operations, and they're taking deliberate steps to make sure those impacts are positive. So why should your company start to think this way? Why not just follow the law and leave it at that? First, let's face it, this is important to your customers and their customers. Governments around the world are passing laws requiring companies to respect human rights in their supply chains. If you don't catch up, leading companies around the world may leave you behind. Second, this is important to your workers. Some of the world's biggest companies have improved employee satisfaction and productivity by collaborating with their employees to improve conditions. In other words, respecting human rights can make your business more successful. Third, and most importantly, it's the right thing to do. National laws provide the bare minimum for companies to avoid ending up in court or the media. But laws don't require companies to build relationships with their employees or their suppliers or the people living nearby. Companies that take those steps aren't just avoiding punishment, they're building a company that will sustain in the long term. Respecting human rights in your supply chain sounds like a big and complicated task, and in some ways it is. But the goal isn't having a perfect record on human rights overnight. The goal is to open up communication channels, to understand your human rights impacts, and to develop systems to manage them. Here's a few first steps. Know your workers. This doesn't have to be sophisticated. For some companies, it will begin with a comment box near the exit. The important thing is to ask your workers about their conditions and hear suggestions for improving them. Know your suppliers. Have you discussed working conditions or environmental impacts with the companies you buy from? When you visit suppliers to check quality or efficiency, include criteria like working hours and protective equipment. Know your human rights impacts. If you employ a lot of low-skilled workers, your greatest impact may be in your salary policies or contracts. If you ship products all over the country, your impact may be in the working hours for your truck drivers. If your company uses lots of water, you may be raising prices for the people living nearby. Once you know your impacts, you should be prepared to communicate them. Taking action on human rights doesn't mean changing everything about your business. In the short term, focus on quick wins to improve your workplace. In the longer term, work with other companies in your sector or region to improve conditions in your supply chain. Many of your own customers will be eager to help you take the first steps. Plus, there are dozens of standards, tools, networks, and civil society organizations ready to support you. So why not start now? So now that you've seen the video for your suppliers, what are some first steps you can take? First, know the issues that are most likely in your suppliers. You don't have to become an expert, but you should know some red flags. Second, include human rights criteria in your existing auditing and control systems. Third, ask your suppliers how they're addressing their broader impacts. A supplier who doesn't understand your values is a supplier that is unlikely to implement them. Nobody expects your company or your suppliers to be perfect overnight. but knowing your risks is the first step toward addressing them.
So I hope that video gave you a taste of like what we're focusing on today. And before we really get started into the presentation, I'd just like to run a question by the audience who are here today. So Charlene will put up a question, and it would be really good if you could respond. And the question is human rights in your business or supply chains a concern for you and your company?
You can once again let us know if you're having issue. Okay, I see some answers coming in already. That's great. And if the current question isn't showing for you, maybe just click refresh after you have input the code to show it. And yeah, we have a few more. Anisha, are you able to see this?
Yes, I can.
Right,
Thank
great.
you.
Awesome.
Okay, we'll give a couple of more seconds and then we'll move on.
I can see that most people commented that yes, it's a major concern or a relatively minor issue as well. I believe that is also one of the reasons why a lot of us are here today. So I will stop sharing for now and over to you, Anisha, to begin your presentation.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, great. So yeah, so according to your responses, which is really interesting, there's a majority of people, definitely say that it is an issue. And then some to really say that it's not such a issue, but they would be interested. So there's nobody who says that it isn't. So I'm happy to see that because it goes to show that we're all here with the same objective. So that's excellent. So so business and human rights, where to start? And since a lot of you may already know about what it means, and also why are human rights important for your company? Why is it that it is such a big deal right now? And so basically, human rights is about the simple idea that everyone should be treated with dignity. This is the starting point. And these are rights that are inherent to all people without discrimination. And understanding and managing, like the emerging understanding that human rights risk is also about business risk. So why we're all here today as well is that very often when you say human rights, you think about war and something that government has to deal with or whatever. But now the word human rights coming into business is something that people are really beginning to understand, that it's not removed from responsible business practices. And it's really important that the rights of people affected by our businesses are the primary focus. And otherwise it comes with many risks. And almost all companies nowadays, actually, when it comes to human resources and safety policies, incorporate these things. And unless you do, the human rights risk of inactivity can lead to operational, legal, and even financial risk. So in terms of like just small examples, there was in 2010 a report by a former special representative that an extractive company actually lost over 6.5 billion over a 2-year period because there were community-related project delays. And this has been because the company did not consult with the communities when they were starting their business. And at the same time, another example is IDFC, an Indian infrastructure bank, found that 190 large infrastructure projects that were delayed, 70% had stalled due to land-related conflicts with communities. Again, this is also because of the fact that the businesses operated in isolation from their stakeholders or rights holders. And this actually came up with, this resulted in a lot of losses to the companies. And today we are living in an age of hyper-transparency. And as many of you know, whether it's a migrant worker on a boat in Thailand or anyone nowadays actually has a smartphone. And so social media and the increasing exchange of information that gets transmitted within seconds means that nothing can be hidden. So we're living in a super transparent society. And this is something that a lot of business leaders are coming to terms to know that there's actually no place to hide anymore. So you have to also really focus seriously on doing the right thing. So examples of, the international focus on abuses conducted in supply chains by businesses is all over now. Like it's the media has really strong interest on rights abuses. So these are just some examples that have been, coming up. And then hitting closer home, the human rights violations by Malaysian companies have also been the focus of increasing growing global scrutiny. So as you can see, Malaysian glove factory, the fact that there was slavery found, why didn't the auditor see, about US banning Malaysian palm oil giant over forced labor, and again, forced labor being the #1 issue for Malaysian businesses, and US penalizing Malaysia for shameful human trafficking. So all these are very negative, articles really, and it just goes to show that there is a real focus where none of these things can be hidden anymore. And it increases. So, these are like in recent times and all that. And it's not to say that this was just in the last 2 years, but this has been going on for a while. So there is very strong global scrutiny about what's going on. And it's more the reason why Malaysian companies really need to think long and hard about how to prepare themselves for it, to identify and also understand what human rights really means, and then in turn, the human rights due diligence. So the business case for human rights, there are 3 critical areas really. So businesses are faced with the operational risks, which includes project delays and cancellations, and also like community grievances. You will have protests from the community, and then there would be increased difficulty to obtain or renew permits, and you could use the license to operate, among others. And then, of course, there's the biggest thing is for many companies is the reputational risk, because this is something that is very difficult to come back from. So this can result in boycotting of your product, losing the brand value. You can't attract good people to work for you. And it could be perceived human rights violations as well, regardless of whether it actually took place. So that is why it is really important that a business communicates also about what they're doing. And then, of course, the legal risk. So including drawn out lawsuits or punitive fines that companies can get slammed with. And also the enforcement of domestic legislation in terms of, that applies in the UK, such as UK Modern Slavery Act. And then there are a lot of legislation that was there before, but now increasingly, and which we will get onto as we go on, is the increasing transition from soft law to hard law and coming up with mandatory human rights due diligence, and this which is being led by the EU, which has huge implications for Malaysian companies. So supply chain management, what does it really mean? So essentially, it's from the source, from the ground, from the raw material, right down the chain to the supplier, the manufacturer, then the distributor. How is the material being distributed? And then the retailer, and finally the consumer. So this is your supply chain. And it's really important that you ensure that the supply chain does not have any rights violations. So it depends who your supplier is. So very often, it's not just the big companies, it's the SMEs, the smaller companies who are also supplying to the bigger companies. And so if the bigger companies are finding out that the SME or the smaller company that they're sourcing from has rights violations, they will not do business with them thereafter because the risk would be too much for them. So these are also to think about, because although it's true that smaller companies don't have the resources and the funds in terms of, to kind of really invest in that and have big CSR teams or sustainability teams, it's still important to get the basics right, because if not, it will be very difficult to move forward. So Malaysia is also definitely, as you know, part of the global supply chain. And increasingly, there are demands and expectations from international clients. So what I briefly mentioned about the fact that with the upcoming mandatory human rights due diligence from the EU, that poses a lot of checks and balances that companies need to respond to and prepare. And there's increased scrutiny and monitoring of suppliers regarding the negative news of environmental or social impacts for international project financing and investments. Banks are under fire internationally if they do, provide funds to companies that may have a negative human rights footprint in the countries that they're operating in. So these are some of the supply chain initiatives and examples that I'm sure a lot of you already know some of them. So these are the ones that a lot of the brands or your buyers overseas will say that a company, say a supplier in Malaysia, would need to sign up to one or more of these. There are of course others, but this is just to give you an idea as to what these are. And this actually kind of goes into the UN Guiding Principles, because the UN Guiding Principles is the human rights standard that applies to all businesses, whatever the size. And it's really important that although the UNGPs are voluntary, it essentially provides a roadmap for governments and businesses on how to respect people and the planet. So they have served as a global soft law standard for the past decade, and now going forward, it's been incorporated into hard law by the European Union. And essentially, the three areas is that the state duty to protect against human rights abuses by third parties, including business. And then there is a corporate responsibility to respect human rights and the need for more effective access to remedies where violations have been conducted. So the state duty to protect, corporate responsibility to respect, and the need for more effective access to remedies. So why are the guiding principles useful for businesses? So in terms of concretely, it can prescribe specific actions for companies. So it's a good guide to kind of really know how you can really manage your human rights impacts, and then define expectations so that you can prevent from harming human rights and develop initiatives and that definitely are not an offset. And also facilitate dialogue. So it's also about stakeholder engagement, so companies to begin discussions with your stakeholders, whether it's government, workers, and communities on the basis of shared values and expectations. And then it's about managing risks. Ignoring human rights definitely involves cost to companies. We talked about that, and the cost is something that the reputational cost, not only financial, are things that are very difficult to come back from. So human rights due diligence, what is this concept really? So it's actually a process to identify and respond to real and potential negative impacts. And the objective of human rights due diligence is to prevent and mitigate impacts on people. So what you need to really remember is that human rights due diligence is about risks and impacts to people and not risks to business. And today, as you know, society is demanding more of business, and so are the shareholders and governments too. And these expectations will keep growing, and business businesses and organizations that don't adapt will struggle to survive. So the UN guiding principles provide that while country risk analysis and stakeholder views are really important, all internationally recognized human rights should be considered to identify and assess human rights risks and impacts. So, and human rights due diligence requires companies to assess impacts and risks in their value chain and act responsibly to prevent, mitigate, and account for human rights abuses. And also at a minimum, if you take from a country level, it means that you need to consider the rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the two international covenants on civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, and the 8 ILO conventions. There are other international standards as well that should be considered where specific groups are being regarded as being vulnerable. For example, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, where the rights of children are implicated in business activities. Other examples might include ILO Convention 169, Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention. So up to now, Malaysia has signed the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in 2012. And Malaysia is committed to implementing its obligations under human rights conventions, to which is party to namely the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, and the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So what is the process to conduct human rights due diligence? Sorry, how do you go about it really? So as a start, there should be a policy commitment. And so the policy commitment gives the right signals by a company that you're serious about doing the right thing. And today there's a real move away from box ticking compliance. And as you may have gathered, traditional audits have come under fire for failing to capture rights abuses in global supply chains. And as an example, why? Because sometimes people think that, okay, well, we are doing audits. Companies think, okay, we are doing audits, so that's a human rights due diligence, and which is not true. Audits are important, but that is not human rights due diligence. It cannot be something that you do instead of doing your human rights due diligence. And you might have, you might recall that last year, the USA prohibited the import of Malaysia-based Top Glove products, claiming evidence of forced labor in their supply chains. And this was despite 28 social audits being conducted between 2017 and 2018. So why was not that picked up? Because audits are a snapshot in time. So it does not mean that the root of the problem, or that, the steps are taken to mitigate the issues can be worked on effectively. So human rights due diligence needs to happen regardless of whether audits are being conducted. So first the policy commitment, and then risk identification assessment. So you need to also, for that, you need to map your supply chain and identify what are the salient risks that you may have in your supply chain. And then you need to come up with measures to prevent and mitigate the impacts of these, the risks that you have identified. And then you need to report through transparent communication. It has to be outward facing. And then where there have been violations that have happened, there needs to be access to remedy in terms of having a grievance mechanism as well, so that people can say, they can express, your workers can, they have access to remedy. So human rights due diligence may involve both risk management and auditing practices. For example, when ensuring that a supplier has a human rights policy, then ensuring non-discrimination in hiring practices as indicated in an auditing report, asking employees whether a factory is paying wages on a timely basis, and then leveraging the business relationship to bring about changes in the operational policies and practices of a business partner so that you can mitigate the legal liability and reputational risks that could come about. So how do you start? So what you need is to have a code of conduct or a policy commitment, and then begin the human rights due diligence process. So identify the human rights impact assessment. That is what needs to be done. Then take appropriate action or corrective measures to counter the negative impacts. Then you need to track and check, because it is also a process of continuous improvement. And then you need to report back on this. And then, as mentioned previously, remediation. So there has to be repatriation for victims. So what is also important is that, you know, a code of conduct or a policy commitment shouldn't be just a piece of paper that sounds good. It has to be implemented. So today there are lots of companies that have wonderful statements of purpose that can actually make you cry, but they're not owned or lived. Developing an internal policy is important for four main reasons. One is that the policy helps you to define the company's own commitments. And then secondly, it guides company relationships with business partners and host governments as well, if your operations are overseas. And then it provides a basis for assessing a company's performance. And it can also serve as a vehicle for demonstrating its commitment to external stakeholders. So that is quite key. So saying that, it'll be really interesting. I just want to put this question to all of you.
Okay, I can see some answers coming in. That's great.
So yeah, so I think, you know, this gives a good idea as well. So the majority, you know, definitely have a code of conduct, code of ethics, or human rights policy, which is excellent. There are some that say no, but then, you know, there are many that, you know, there are ones who are hoping to develop. And I'm very happy to see that nobody seems to feel that it's not a priority. So excellent. That's very good. So the other thing is to also remember that today we are also seeing that smart companies are transitioning from traditional CSR to business and human rights. And as you know, as has been the case in the past, you know, taking pictures of, you know, the CEO planting trees or giving charity donations and so on just doesn't cut it anymore. And it needs to be really about the human rights impact, addressing those through human rights due diligence. That is a priority. And also there is greater interest in ESG issues by investors, really, especially on the S, the social. So at the same time, audits, as we said before, alone are not considered as proof of responsible business conduct. So soft law versus hard law. So today, as many of you know, governments are passing legislation that call on companies to report on their human rights profile in the form of mandatory human rights due diligence. So UN guiding principles are regarded as soft law, as I said before, and they're now changing. And there has been a significant push to make the practice of human rights due diligence mandatory for businesses in some regions and countries. And as I said, the EU taking the lead on this. And business associations, law firms, and management companies and so on they know the regulatory environment by deploying and they deploy an array of tools and advisory services to help businesses to manage their human rights risk. And they're also joining civil society and multilateral organizations in promoting the implementation of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, to help states and businesses meet the growing demand for socially and environmentally responsible behavior. it's also important to really know that businesses should not be expected to do this alone. Civil society can't do it alone. Governments can't do it alone. It's really important to work together on this. So none can operate in isolation when it comes to human rights due diligence. And also human rights due diligence now isn't an option anymore. It clearly spells out today that it cannot be business as usual. If so, it comes as a huge price. So again, going back to the UN Guiding Principles, the UN Guiding Principles provides the world's highest level of agreed standards for conducting human rights due diligence. And these are the standards that are found under Principles 17 to 21. And it's also spoken as to know and show. So for companies to know and show the process that they're taking, and so that it demonstrates that a company knows what their human rights risks are, and to show what they're doing about them. And it outlines that the companies must prevent and account for how they address their adverse human rights impacts. And that is why businesses undertake due diligence. And then there is also, as some say, it also goes to show what not to do. The fact that, when you do find risks in your supply chain, you should not cut and run. So it's more about the know and show, and definitely not cutting and running. And today there is no off-the-shelf approach to human rights due diligence, and it's actually really depends on the sector you're in, the size of your company. It isn't a one-size-fits-all. There isn't a silver bullet, and the approaches will vary according to the complexity of your operations, the country context, production factors, and what the enabling environment is. So human rights due diligence practice will also vary in complexity with the size of the business enterprise and be based on how serious the risk posed to stakeholders are. That is really important to know. And at the same time, human rights due diligence should be conducted on an ongoing basis. It's not a one-off thing to do because you have to monitor it. It's also about continuous improvement, as I said. Just because there's some violation, just because a company finds that there is child labor, does not mean that you remove that company from your supplier list. Instead, you support that company, and to kind of and to address what the issues are. And when I say conducted on an ongoing basis, it's a bit like what you would be doing, like, on occupational health and safety reviews. It has to be done fairly regularly to demonstrate commitment across the organization and to consumers and stakeholders. And this comes under UN Guiding Principle 17C. So all these that I'm talking about are in the UN Guiding Principles. So that is your guide. That states how you should, operate. And it's not technical, it's not prescriptive, it's a guidance. It's something that is easy. It's a roadmap, really. So it's not something really complicated that you have to spend hours trying to understand. But at the same time, to be really effective, human rights due diligence should draw on independent external human rights expertise where possible, when you don't have the skills in-house, because it always takes an independent person, to look at it through a neutral but a human rights lens, to understand the issues and best practices in working with vulnerable groups, and then advise the company accordingly. So this is something, worth investing in. And you would have seen, I think many of you, there are increasingly roles for sustainability experts, ESG experts. It's now, there is a lot of companies are getting these people on board, on the human rights issues, on how to best conduct human rights due diligence. So this is really important for you to think about. And also, the role of industry associations or business associations such as BCSD is really important because, again, they're in a unique position where they are able to support their companies. So whether it's on how to train the companies, give them the technical know-how, focus on it from a sectoral perspective, and so on, and focus on SMEs, it depends. So they are able to identify, so that, I mean, like what the CSD is doing right now in terms of being responsive to their member needs, that is something that a lot of industry associations should be doing more of. So today we are in a very, very evolving regulatory environment on business and human rights. It's kind of exploding, really. So, I mean, we started off with, what was there previously, the California Transparency in Supply Chain Act in 2010, the UK Modern Slavery Act in 2015, Australia Modern Slavery Act in 2018. But now the new mandatory due diligence laws creating this duty to know and show and to report on human rights risks throughout the operation supply chains are many. And I've only just put 3 here, but there are many others as well. Canada, Norway, they have as well, and more European countries are really coming up with their mandatory human rights due diligence laws. And so there is a significant increase in human rights-based legislation and regulation, including laws mandating disclosures of human rights processes that extend through a company's operations and supply chain. There is definitely no getting out of this. And these legislative developments mean that businesses headquartered in some countries will be required to ask their business partners, as in Malaysia, and suppliers elsewhere to show that they're mitigating risks and addressing negative impacts through human rights due diligence. So there is much, much greater scrutiny on this. And it's much better to start thinking about this and responding straight away. So one of the critical areas, as I said, is stakeholder engagement, because it's about working together. Engaging with your stakeholders and right holders is really important to your business. And due diligence involves multi-stakeholder engagement, and that is one of the key principles of the UN Guiding Principles. And to assess human rights impacts accurately, companies need to try and understand the concerns of stakeholders by consulting with them directly. And it's necessary to engage with stakeholders of different backgrounds and interests in the human rights due diligence process to get a complete and accurate view of human rights risks posed by the business. So what are examples of stakeholders? Because sometimes, it varies, and not, each company, depending on the sector, also go to different stakeholders. So I would say that a complete list of stakeholders is difficult to compile, as they're numerous and based on the country and sector context. But generally, they could include workers or employees, workers of supply chain partners, consumers, shareholders and investors, service contractors, communities near or downstream from a factory plant or a plantation, civil society actors, government, transportation professionals, and other vulnerable groups, including women and girls, and people with disabilities, and of course, indigenous people. This is really important. So saying this, I hope this has kind of given you a kind of a snapshot of what it's about, really, and how best to move forward. These are the basic ingredients on getting a human rights due diligence process started. These are the main components. There are more, that we need to focus on, obviously, in terms of how you do that. But we will do that at another stage, because in this time, it's not possible to go deep dive into that. But lastly, before I hand over to Charlene to kind of recap and then to do some interactive work together, I would like to say that it's, as I've said in this slide, it's always easier to be part of the solution than part of the problem. And that way, your company can definitely be a force for good. So it's important to get started now, because smart companies are really transitioning now to human rights due diligence. And it's better to do that now and not get left out. So I wish you all the best in your efforts. Please do feel free to reach out to BCSD. for more guidance and training on how you can move on these issues. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that useful information. That I know there was a lot to cover, and indeed human rights due diligence is a huge topic that would be impossible to cover in 90 minutes, again, which is why we will be running a planned series modules next year on this. And if you're interested in that, we could dive into that further in detail. But for now, let's very quickly move on to a little bit of an interactive discussion. And we've learned a lot. We've listened to Anisha present about a lot of very deep information already. But let's maybe take a quick look at a case study. And let me just very quickly share my screen. So for this next part, I would love for everyone to, again, feel free to unmute yourself and participate in the discussion. If you're a little bit shy, no worries, use the chat box and type your answers. But we're gonna do a case study and we're gonna take a look at like just an example scenario. And we're gonna use what we've just heard and learned from Anisha's sharing for today and make some quick decisions about this. So I have the slides up right now and you should all be able to see this. So this would be the case study. And again, we believe in application instead of just theoretical. So let's all take maybe the next few minutes to put ourselves into the shoes, imaginary shoes of this situation. Let's imagine that your company has been working with another company, a leading construction company, on a luxury apartment project. It has been brought to your notice by an activist or a campaigning organization that this lead construction company that you're working with, they have begun to import labor from neighboring countries. You're being told by this organization that these workers are being paid less than the national minimum wage. Their passports are being taken, held with this construction company. Basically, the freedom is revoked. And these workers are also being housed in extremely unhygienic and cramped accommodation facilities. So yeah, let's take a moment to put yourself in that shoe. Again, this is a construction company, a leading construction company that you are working with on a luxury apartment project. Now, I'm going to put a few examples on the screen, which have been prepared by Anisha, and then we're going to choose very quickly. There's not really a right or wrong answer here. We just want to hear your thoughts. So which of these actions would you take after hearing that from the activists or the campaigning organization? The first action is A, refrain from investigating the alleged rights violations of the migrant workers in case the completion of your luxury apartment project gets delayed because your company may suffer losses. Or action B, which is to immediately conduct an assessment of risks to your company that can arise from human rights violations, such as legal liability, damage to reputation, and also escalating financial costs. And finally, action C, decide not to comment on any accusations made by the human rights observer, the campaigning organization, and just continue with business as usual. So we're going to take a few moments now to answer. And again, if anyone, if you would like to share your thoughts on this, feel free to unmute yourself, explain which one that you will be choosing, which action, and also maybe talk about what factors motivated you to take these actions. You may also put in the chat box really quickly, are you choosing A, B, or C? And I can see a question from Sharmila as well from the direct messages. There will be a recording of the talk shared later. No worries, everyone will get a video recording as well. And I totally understand that there's a lot of good information here that you will need to digest later. So yes, we will be sharing the video recording. So once again, opening the floor to everyone. Would anyone like to share their thoughts? Maybe just unmute yourself and let us know which action your company or you actually will be taking for your company. Don't be shy.
So refrain from investigating the alleged rights violations of the migrant worker in case completion of the project gets delayed and your company may suffer losses. No, that should not be the case, because again, you're looking at the risk to your company. You're not thinking about the risk to the people affected, and in this case, migrant workers. So it is really important. And Andrew, I can just see B, of course, yes, definitely. So immediately conduct an assessment of risk to your company that can arise from human rights violations, such as legal liability, damage to reputation, escalating financial costs. Yes, Maura saying B. And yeah, and so it's important, because very often people, go about just not thinking, okay, how do we minimize, damage? So you just think only of the company. You don't think about that. That the big picture. You don't think about who are the affected people. That is not the way to do human rights due diligence, or when you come up with something like this. And great. A lot of people are already saying B is the appropriate action. Great, we're warming up now, so that's excellent. I think we have time for one more question. And also, Charlene, maybe we could go back to, there was that question that I put out about prioritizing human rights risk. Can we run that as well at some point?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
If you have time.
I believe we do have time for that. Let's
okay,
do
but shall we do the second case study as well?
Definitely, yes. All right.
Great.
So I can see a lot of people answering B, and I also think that's great.
B.
Yeah,
well done, Charlene.
well, but sometimes in reality it's a bit difficult, because you have to consider other factors as well, especially businesses with profit and losses. So yeah, in real life maybe the answer wouldn't be that clear cut. Let's very quickly move on to the next case study. So this is the next one. Imagine that there's this hotel chain that your company has invested in. They're building a new development on a land that's known for its wildlife and rare for fauna and flora, like maybe endangered species or something. The land where the park will be constructed was also originally populated by an indigenous community, and this community has been forcefully moved to less suitable land with inadequate compensation by a government determined to increase foreign exchange earnings through tourism. So the government wants to focus on tourism, and they've relocated this community. So again, this is the next scenario. And here are the options for you to choose from. What would you do? So again, feel free to use the chat box or unmute yourself. Would you cancel this partnership as you feel that the resulting reputational and financial risk could cripple your company? Are you going to immediately contact the hotel chain or demand the freezing of further operations until comprehensive human rights impact assessment is undertaken before proceeding further? Or maybe you could go for option C, contact the relevant government officials to engage with them, using your position as a key investor and pressurize all you can, to engage with the local indigenous community, both the men and the women, and create an inclusive forum. Or the final one is D, try putting pressure on the government to provide adequate compensation to the local community. So let's very quickly, maybe give a bit of thought on this. Which action would you take if this were your situation? We have quite a few votes for C and B. B seems to be the most popular. We also have a lot of C coming in, so could also be D. That's a very good point, Andrew. Try putting pressure on the government as well.
Okay. I think everyone is on the right track. And quite honestly, I would say B, C, and D. You can do all three. These are the various steps that you can do. Canceling the partnership would be the worst case scenario. You should not be doing that, because that is what I referred to as cutting and running, because you are just thinking about your company. You don't really care what is going to happen to the community or the people or the environment. So in this case, definitely, well done, everyone. All of you are on the right track. And yeah, I can see that you're going to be really good at moving on the human rights due diligence work.
Okay, we have one more, right, Anisha? Let me just
Yes,
quickly,
the one whether it's actually a true or false one. So
Right.
it'd be interesting to see whether, you know, what I've been saying has registered.
Okay, all right. And if I could welcome everyone to go back to the Mentimeter. I'll be sharing the screen right now. And again, if you want to elaborate on your answers, just unmute yourself and maybe just share some thoughts. Don't be shy. We're not going to judge you for any right or wrong answers. But if you could go back to menti.com, use the code 85866571, refresh your screen and make sure that this question is popping up for you. And the question is to prioritize human rights risks, should businesses be measuring the seriousness of and compare it to the risk it poses to their reputation or operations? Is this statement true or false? Okay.
Can I answer this?
Of course,
Yes,
yes,
please.
sure.
All right. So basically, I choose true because like it's part of due diligence, and also when we talk about the risk, HR has to measure the risk of that company in order to achieve a positive image of that company, and also it's based on the crisis management plan. It's part of it. That's my thoughts about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And does anyone else want to share why they chose either true or false? Okay.
Hi, this is Aaron.
Hello, Aaron.
I just want to share some my thoughts here. I chose yes as well, because I think looking at risk is a way for us to determine if the company or the business will be able to continue for going concern. If human rights risk will pose disruption to the operation, and if you don't care about it, you don't look at it, doesn't mean it's not there. It's just going to strike at times when you least expect it to strike, and it would eventually cause problems to the business that will have financial impact as well as reputational ones.
That's great. Thank you for sharing as well, Aaron. Okay. Yeah, we're a little bit pressed for time, so would you like me to move on, Anisha?
Okay, so thank you for that, but I understand the logic of it, but it is actually false. Okay, because as you may recall, when it comes to human rights due diligence and identifying those, it's about risks to the people, and it's not about the business operations, reputation, or profitability. This doesn't mean that it's not important, but when it comes to human rights, you're talking about the impact to the people. So that should be the answer. So, but again, this is all part of, how we learn, and it's important to have these kind of conversations as well. Yeah, it gives you food for thought. I hope you're now understanding what it is. It's not to say that, yes, I mean, the business has to go on, but then again, the whole idea is about the impact of your operations on the people. So it is about the risks to the people. Always remember that. It's not about the business operations. It's not about that's not the primary concern at this stage. And business concerns can come after you have addressed the impact of your business on the risk it poses to the community or the people.
Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that as well, Anisha. And I think it's interesting that there's a gap as well, because like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the reality is a bit challenging. When it comes, it's not a straightforward answer when it comes to applying human rights due diligence, which is important, why we need to learn about this and take concrete actions.
Yeah.
to begin incorporating this into our business and understand it better for the future.
Yeah.
I
And
know
as you,
yeah.
Charlene, just to say that, like it may seem, tricky at first when you just straight away you need to focus on the people and you think, well, what about the business? How are we going to stay profitable if all these things? But that is not the case. That is why we need to go more deep dive into it, where you break it down and it's there. But when you look at it from outside, whether it's your buyers or a brand that's doing business with you, it is not the profitability factor that they're looking at when it comes to this. It is the violation of human rights. It's finding those in your supply chain. Those are the things that needs to be nipped in the bud. So it's also to address the root of the problem, and that is something that can be done as we delve more into this, and then it'll come far more organically to you that this is straight away false. Like you can come to that, but it is a process of learning and also unlearning practices that have been done before. That's important, because it may not have been the case before, because previously businesses look only at that. But now that is not the way to go forward, because that does not get you anywhere. You come under fire for doing that. So this is how you mitigate your risks going forward.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Anisha. So I hope everyone is still on the Menti. So if you're still on the Menti, again, just maybe click refresh and very quickly like answer some of these questions. So let's take the next 5 minutes, and I hope that again, there was a lot of information given during that 90 minutes. So is there something that you learned during the training that you did not know before? Using the same link, the same number Menti code as well. Very quickly, maybe just give us some thoughts about what you learned during the training that you did not know prior to this. Let's maybe take the next 5 minutes to do the post-assessment. All right. And also, if you want to unmute yourself again, like how people have done earlier as well, and sort of share why you wrote this, we welcome that as well. Okay. How to conduct due diligence. All right, great. Okay, can see some answers coming in. Is there anything specifically about human rights due diligence that you learned that you did not know before? That was maybe interesting to you, or something that you were like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, and just looking through some of the comments as well, which, okay, I can see a comment from Ahani about the previous question. I choose true because it's part of prioritization. Great, okay. Isni said if the risk is huge, the company should and could address it quickly. Exactly. I mean, that is very relevant as well. And I also see Andrew saying it's a false choice. That's great. And Andrew, I believe you've been paying attention during our session. A company's reputation is not enhanced by walking away. Prioritizing risk is not about choosing risk. That's right. Okay, taking a look at the answers for this one. Realigning my thinking, people is a center of focus. Yes, that's very good. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, did you want to say anything, Anisha?
No, I'm really glad that some of these areas have filtered through. Yeah, especially things like audit not necessarily being human rights due diligence.
Yes, that is a very important point as well. Thank you to whoever shared that audit is not necessarily human rights due diligence. All right, and then I'm just going to move very quickly on to the next question. If anyone is still filling out question 1, it's all right. Just take your time and then refresh later. But the next question would be, based on what you learned, what will you do differently going forward? Again, just click refresh if the new question isn't showing for you. And also feel free to unmute yourself or share in the chat box about what will you do differently going forward. Could be personally, could be in your capacity in your company or organization. But yeah, just very quickly answer based on what we learned today. Is there anything that you're going to start doing differently? Yeah. Okay, we're just going to give everyone a few minutes. Learn more about human rights assessment impact. Okay, that's great. Does anyone want to share like what specifically perhaps you would like to learn more, or yeah? I see someone's talking about engaging stakeholders. That's great. More robust due diligence. All right. Just take your time to fill it out. Okay, I can just see another one coming in. To obtain the survey from all employees about human rights, including employee input. I like that idea. We advocate for a democratic environment, I would suppose. So yeah, let me again continue to take your time to fill out those questions. And let me just quickly move on to the next one, which I believe is a multiple choice question where you can vote. You can choose more than one. Again, but this is related to going in depth into what more you would like to learn. So there are a few options for you to choose. And yeah, just maybe very quickly take some time to vote on what specifically would you like to see more. So today was more about the basics. Moving forward, is there anything you'd like to learn in order to really incorporate human rights due diligence into your company or your organization? Yeah.
Yeah, just to add, like, what are the areas that you feel would like give you more depth of information so that you can, you know, stay ahead of the curve, you know, on that?
If anyone also maybe would like to like share their like what are certain challenges maybe that's making it tough or difficult for you to get like all these resources or to learn these things. I think that would also be really interesting as well, so that we can understand, like, for example, what is stopping you from getting support or guidance on how best to conduct human rights due diligence. Like, is it maybe like, are there a lack of tools out there, or is it just something you're not aware of? Feel free to share your thoughts on what are these challenges that are stopping you.
Yeah, more than the tools, it's also really important to, because only you will know in your company, because to move things like this, you need commitment from leadership at the top. So you need to get your management on board on this, because they need to take the lead as well. And this is not something on human rights due diligence or business and human rights. Isn't something that just lies only with the human resources team. This has to cut across your organization at every level. People have to be on the same page about it, know what it is, how to articulate it, understanding it, like what we talked about, you know, that it's about risks to the community, risks to your you know, people that are impacted by the negative impacts of your operations. That is where the risk is. So that kind of understanding has to permeate right from the top down. So that is why, you know, so you need to go back and you need to feel confident that you can also convince your senior management that this is the way it is. It cannot be business as usual.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point to bring up as well, Nisha. And I think despite all the struggles, I think we're starting to see a bit of a change as well here, in the Malaysian business context, towards moving, you know, towards that. So that's perhaps something that we could look at and educate as well in our next in our next series. All right. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to very quickly move on to the final post-assessment question. If you could bring anyone else from your organization to do this training, and also in-depth training for the future, related to what you answered in the previous question, like all these extra like tools that you want to learn in the future, who would you bring and why? And here also, I would really encourage everyone to, if you want to unmute yourself and just share, like very quickly, who you would like to bring and why is that? Yeah, just feel free to do so.
Excellent.
I want to bring your chairman. I like your bravado. I totally advocate for that as well. Yeah, just imagine if there are no like resource restrictions. You know, like you could just honestly just extend this invitation and the person will come. Like, you know, who would you bring and why?
More than anything else, who would you bring so that would institute change? That will help you to do your job. It'll help you to place your company in a leadership position when it comes to managing risks and conducting effective human rights due diligence. You will be able to get more investment coming into your company and so on.
Someone brought up company culture. I like that. I believe that a lot of times the strategy is very much linked to the culture as well that the company is building.
So far, everyone that you have that you're mentioning is excellent. I think you're really thinking things out strategically, what is needed. It's not just saying, okay, I'm going to bring my team. It's not that. You've really thought about it, and you know like who can make a difference. You know what kind of support you would need to take forward what you have learned today and what you hope to learn in the future as well about going deep dive and how to make things move. So I'm really happy that you are on the right track, and that is excellent. And let's make it happen.
Thank you everyone for participating as well, either through chatting or unmuting yourselves in the discussion. We have definitely gone over time, but again, because today's topic is really, it's huge and it's very difficult to cover it within the 90 minutes. Just want to extend a huge thank you to Anisha as well for delivering this enjoyable workshop on human rights due diligence as well, giving us the basic introduction. And also wanted to thank everyone for attending our workshop today. And if you're interested in learning more about how to make your business sustainable, feel free to check out our website, www.bcsd.my. Follow us on our LinkedIn for more activities regarding human rights, the environment, and how to make your business sustainable. And just want to give a huge thank you once more for attending this workshop, Human Rights Due Diligence and Why Business as Usual Needs to Change. And a huge thank you also to UN Global Compact for giving us this opportunity. Back over to you, Kylie, if you have any closing remarks.
All right. Thank you so much, Roberto, Charlene, and Anisha for the super fruitful session. I hope everyone found this session as insightful as I did, and I hope you're able to incorporate these practices learned within your business moving forward. So today's session is coming to an end, and on behalf of UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei, and also our knowledge partner BCSD Malaysia, I'd like to thank everyone again for making time in your busy schedules to join us. Before I end this, I would also like to invite everyone to come join us in our other workshops tomorrow of the SME SDG Festival. Do note it is the last day. And also I have one more event, which is the Go ESG ASEAN 2021 Virtual Summit, which is happening on 24th and 25th November. So it will be great if I can see everyone there, like, you know, it'll be a big event. And once you sign up for the event, you will also get access to the month-long virtual exhibition. I'll be sharing the link down in the chat box below, and I really hope to see you all there. With that, I wish you all to stay safe and have a pleasant day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.